And this, recruits Lieutenant Krix-Ta announced, their 4 primary tentacles rippling with barely contained excitement, is why today's lecture on Deathworlders is so crucial to your development as Galactic Marines. The lieutenant's array of optical sensors swept across the classroom, taking in the 24 fresh-faced recruits. Well-faced might be a bit of a stretch, given that half of them were gaseous beings contained in environment suits, and at least 3 were what humans would probably describe as sentient crystal formations, but they were fresh. That much was certain. Computer, display species file 7249H, designation human. The holoprojector hummed to life, displaying a rotating image of what appeared to be a rather unremarkable bipedal species. Now, can anyone tell me what makes this creature so special? A recruit near the back, one of the crystalline ones, chimed in with a musical tone. They're from a Class 12 Deathworld, sir. Correct. Recruit chime of breaking glass. Krix-Ta's tentacles rippled in approval. But what does that actually mean? Silence fell over the classroom. Even the gaseous beings stopped their usual gentle swirling. It means... Krix-Ta continued, their voice dropping to what they probably thought was a dramatic whisper, that these creatures evolved on a planet that should, by all reasonable metrics, have killed them several million years ago. Their homeworld, Earth, features such charming environmental factors as regular exposure to a class A radiation source at point-blank range, atmospheric corrosion agents, massive tectonic instability, and temperature variations that would shatter most sentient species like cheap crystalware. They paused. No offense, recruit chime. None taken, sir. But the most fascinating aspect of humans isn't just their survival, it's their ridiculous capacity to keep functioning even after sustaining what any reasonable species would consider catastrophic damage. Computer, display medical file H238. The hologram changed to show various human medical procedures. Several recruits emitted distress signals at different wavelengths. Yes, I know it's disturbing, but observe humans can survive the loss of entire limbs, internal organs, massive portions of their brain tissue. And not just survive, but continue to function productively in society. It's as if they simply refuse to acknowledge when they should, by all rights, be dead. A gelatinous recruit raised a pseudopod. Sir, is it true that humans will sometimes remove their own limbs to escape danger? Ah, you've been reading ahead, recruit blob. Yes, there are documented cases of humans performing what they call emergency self-amputation. They consider this a perfectly reasonable survival strategy. Krix-Ta's optical sensors dilated in what might have been horror or admiration. It was hard to tell with xenomorphic facial expressions. But sir, another recruit burbled. Why are we learning about humans here? This is a peaceful garden world. The nearest human settlement is several parsecs away. Krix-Ta's tentacles went rigid, their species equivalent of a smirk. Ah, that's where you're wrong, recruit. Due to their bizarre adaptability, humans have become some of the most sought-after maintenance technicians in the galaxy, and as of last month we have one stationed right here at this facility. A wave of nervous energy rippled through the classroom. Even the crystalline recruits seemed to vibrate at a slightly higher frequency. In fact, Krix-Ta continued, their tentacles now practically dancing with excitement. This posting will give us a unique opportunity to observe human behavior in a controlled environment. Think of it as a living laboratory for your xenobiology studies. The lieutenant pulled up another hologram, this one showing the facility's maintenance schedule. The human will be performing regular checks on our fusion cores. I expect detailed observations from all of you. Remember, knowledge of Deathworlders could save your life one day, or at least help you understand why a human might respond to a plasma burn by saying ouch and continuing their work, as if nothing happened. The recruits shifted uncomfortably in their various forms of seating. Welcome to Xenobiology 101, where the subject matter wasn't just alive, it was probably too stubborn to die even if it wanted to. The first-time specialist Jack Murphy walked into the facility's mess hall. 3 gaseous recruits immediately condensed into their liquid state from sheer anxiety. Lieutenant Krix-Ta, who had been eagerly awaiting this moment, started recording on all 4 of their optical sensors simultaneously. Jack, completely oblivious to the minor panic he was causing, just grinned and waved. Morning, folks. Don't suppose any of you know where I can get a decent cup of coffee around here? The crystalline recruits refracted light in patterns that indicated severe confusion. One of them chimed questioningly, "Lieutenant, the human is requesting a toxic stimulant beverage." Indeed, Krix-Ta's tentacles wiggled in scholarly excitement. They intentionally consume it multiple times daily. Observe the specimen's casual attitude toward ingesting poison. Jack grabbed a mug from what he hoped was the equivalent of a coffee maker. It looked more like a lava lamp having an existential crisis, and poured himself what he really hoped was coffee. "You know I can hear you all right, and specimen seems a bit formal. Jack works just fine." The lieutenant's tentacles twisted into what passed for their species' version of embarrassment. "Ah, yes, recruits. This is Specialist Jack Murphy, our new maintenance technician. He will be responsible for ensuring our fusion cores continue functioning at optimal capacity." Speaking of which, Jack took a sip of his maybe coffee. It tasted like someone had described coffee to a machine that had only ever made fluorescent algae smoothies. "I should probably get started on my rounds. These cores aren't going to maintain themselves." He paused. "Unless they do here. That's not like a thing, right?" "No, Specialist Murphy. Our fusion cores do not possess self-maintenance capabilities," Krix-Ta replied, while frantically recording notes about the human's apparent disappointment at this fact. "Shame. That would have made my job a lot easier." Jack shrugged and headed toward the door, casually dodging a floating geometric shape that might have been another recruit or might have been a very ambitious piece of modern art. So one of the previously liquidated recruits had managed to return to their gaseous state. The human appears to be moving directly toward the maintenance shaft. Doesn't he know that the temperature in there exceeds comfortable levels for most carbon-based life forms? Krix-Ta's optical sensors dilated with interest. "Ah, yes, this should be educational. Follow at a safe distance, recruits." The alien Marine squad watched in horrified fascination as Jack climbed into the maintenance shaft, whistling what might have been "Take Me Home." Country roads, if country roads were being described by someone who'd only experienced anti-gravity transport tubes. "Temperature in shaft 318 Kelvin," one recruit reported nervously. "Toxic particulate level would be lethal to 60% of known sentient species," another added. Is he complaining about it being a bit stuffy in here?" a third asked incredulously. Jack's voice echoed up from the shaft. "Hey, Lieutenant. Quick question, are fusion cores supposed to make a sound like whomp whomp zing or more of a ping whoosh kathunk?" I don't know," Krix-Ta admitted, their tentacles twisting in confusion. "Our technical manuals don't use human onomatopoeia as diagnostic criteria." "Well, it's definitely more of a whomp whomp zing right now, so I'm going to take a look at the magnetic containment fields. Probably just need a bit of calibration. No biggie." The recruits watched as Jack casually adjusted potentially catastrophic fusion parameters while maintaining a running commentary about his weekend plans, and whether anyone knew if the mess hall would ever serve anything that doesn't taste like it was approved by a committee of safety inspectors who'd never experienced joy. After an hour of work that had the alien observers alternating between amazement and terror, Jack emerged from the shaft, covered in what appeared to be coolant fluid and sporting a satisfied grin. All done. Cores are purring like kittens now. Well, like kittens that could theoretically reduce everything within a 5-kilometer radius to their component atoms. But you know, happy kittens. "Fascinating," Krix-Ta muttered, their tentacles practically tied in knots from taking notes. "Recruit chime. Please add to the observation log human maintains positive attitude and uses incomprehensible terrestrial metaphors, even while covered in highly corrosive substances." "Oh, this stuff." Jack looked down at himself. "Nah, it's fine. Had worse on me during basic training. Though I should probably grab a shower before lunch. Speaking of which, any chance the food synthesizers have figured out hamburgers yet?" The collective groan from the alien Marines suggested that lunch would be another fascinating cultural experience. Krix-Ta could hardly wait to document it all. In retrospect, Lieutenant Krix-Ta should have known something was wrong when the fusion core started making what Jack had described as a spicy weasel in a washing machine sound. The human's increasingly creative sound effects vocabulary had become something of a legend among the recruits over the past few weeks. "That's definitely not supposed to happen," Jack muttered, head deep in a maintenance panel, while 3 different warning lights competed for the title of most ominous glow. "Lieutenant, you might want to get your recruits to a safe distance. Like maybe the next star system." Krix-Ta's tentacles twisted anxiously. "Specialist Murphy, our evacuation protocols clearly state." Yeah, about that, Jack interrupted, pulling his head out of the panel with an expression that made even the gaseous recruits solidify with worry. We've got about 3 minutes before this core decides to throw what humans call a tantrum, and trust me, you don't want to be around for that playdate. The lieutenant's optical sensors rapidly cycled through their emergency spectrum. Recruits. Implement emergency protocol Delta 7. Move to the designated safe zone immediately. Make that 2 minutes, Jack called out cheerfully, far too cheerfully for someone elbow deep in an increasingly unstable fusion reactor. Don't worry, I've got this handled. Probably. Maybe. Let's call it a solid 60-40 chance. Specialist Murphy, you must evacuate as well, Krix-Ta insisted, their tentacles practically tying themselves in knots. Can't do that, Lieutenant. Someone's got to manually override the containment field or this whole facility goes kaboom. And since I'm the only one here with hands, he wiggled his fingers demonstratively before diving back into the maintenance panel. The next 90 seconds were a blur of activity. Recruits evacuated in various states of matter, some leaving trail of anxious crystalline fragments or nervous gas clouds in their wake. Krix-Ta, bound by duty and an increasingly fascinated horror, remained at the safety threshold, recording everything. 30 seconds, Jack announced. You know, this reminds me of this one time in engineering school. The rest of his sentence was cut off by a sound that definitely wasn't in any of his previous onomatopoeia lessons. It was the kind of sound that made physics itself want to call in sick. There was a flash of light that even Krix-Ta's most advanced optical sensors couldn't process, followed by a wave of energy that made the air taste like mathematics gone wrong. When everything cleared, the fusion core was humming contentedly, as if it hadn't just threatened to redecorate the facility in abstract expressionist vapor. And there, sprawled on the floor with what could generously be described as 3/4 of his original number of limbs, was Jack Murphy. Medic Krix-Ta's call broke several records for multi-tentacled semaphore. We need immediate medical assistance. The human is. Still conscious, thanks for asking, Jack groaned from the floor. He tried to push himself up, frowned at where his right arm used to be, and then used his remaining arm instead. Okay, good news, facility's safe. Bad news, pretty sure I'm not going to be able to fill out the incident report in triplicate. The medical team arrived in what might have been record time, if anyone had been in a state to record it. They found themselves treating a human who seemed more annoyed about the paperwork implications than the fact that he was missing an appendage. Specialist Murphy, one of the medical officers, ventured, "You appear to be in shock." "Nah, this is just Tuesday for me." "Well, I think it's Tuesday. Do we use Earth calendar here? Actually, speaking of Earth things, anyone know if the med bay has decent coffee? Because I could really use a cup right now." The medical team exchanged looks that transcended species barriers in their confusion. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Krix-Ta was frantically updating their xenobiology notes. Subject displays unprecedented casualness toward catastrophic injury, possible human coping mechanism, or further evidence of species-wide insanity. Further research required. As they loaded Jack onto a medical transport, he gave a thumbs up with his remaining hand. "Hey, Lieutenant. Once I'm patched up, we should really update those maintenance protocols, and maybe install some emergency coffee stations. You know, for the next time someone needs to manually prevent a fusion core meltdown." Krix-Ta watched the transport leave, their tentacles slowly unknotting themselves. Somehow, they had a feeling their report on human resilience was about to get a lot more interesting. Jack's first day back at work began with him using his prosthetic arm as a makeshift coffee cup holder while he climbed through maintenance shafts. Lieutenant Krix-Ta's recruits, who had been assigned to observe safety protocols, but were really there to watch the human, weren't sure whether to be impressed or horrified. The specimen Krix-Ta caught themselves. "Excuse me, Specialist Murphy appears to have already modified his prosthetic for improved efficiency." "You mean the cup holder thing Jack called down from somewhere in the shaft network?" "Nah, that's just a happy accident. Though I did add a magnetic attachment point for my tools, and a bottle opener, and this neat little compartment that's perfect for emergency snacks." One of the gaseous recruits condensed slightly. "Sir, is it standard human practice to modify medical equipment for snack storage?" "Nothing standard with humans," Krix-Ta replied, their tentacles moving in what had become their signature fascinated confusion pattern. "That's perhaps the only standard thing about them. The facility quickly adapted to what Jack called his new and improved maintenance style. The fusion cores were serviced with his usual cavalier efficiency, though now with added commentary about the advantages of having a prosthetic arm that couldn't feel heat. "See, this is actually better," he explained while reaching into a section that the manual specifically labeled "Do not touch under any circumstances. The prosthetic can handle these temperature extremes way better than my old arm. Plus, if something goes wrong, I've got spare parts now." The crystalline recruits vibrated at frequencies indicating severe anxiety. Jack's creative use of his prosthetic became legendary throughout the facility. He used it as a makeshift ladder rung, a temporary support strut, and once, memorably, as an improvised percussion instrument during the facility's first and last human music appreciation hour. "I'm telling you," he insisted to anyone who would listen, "you haven't really experienced We Will Rock You until you've heard it played on a prosthetic arm against a fusion core housing. The acoustics are amazing." Lieutenant Krix-Ta's observation log, grew increasingly complex. Day 45 post-return to duty subject continues to display remarkable adaptability. Has now programmed prosthetic to interface with facility systems, claiming it makes diagnostics easier. Engineering team unable to determine how this is possible. Subject's response: "I just asked it nicely." The alien Marine's initial horror at Jack's injury had gradually transformed into something approaching awe. They watched as he navigated maintenance challenges with a combination of ingenuity, stubborn determination, and what he called percussive maintenance. A technique that made the engineering staff produce sounds previously thought impossible for their respective species. You know what the best part is? Jack demonstrated while using his prosthetic to reach a particularly awkward angle in the cooling system. No more pins and needles when working in tight spaces, though I do kind of miss being able to feel when I'm about to hit my funny bone. Now it's more like hitting my mildly amusing alloy bone. Even the most skeptical members of the facility staff had to admit that Jack's efficiency hadn't decreased. If anything, he'd become more effective at his job. He developed what he called creative solutions to various maintenance challenges, though the facility's safety officer preferred the term anxiety-inducing innovations. "Look," Jack explained after using his prosthetic arm as an improvised power conduit during a minor emergency, "sometimes you've got to think outside the box. Or outside the arm, in this case." The recruits had started taking notes on his techniques, much to Lieutenant Krix-Ta's approval. The human ability to adapt and overcome limitations provides valuable tactical insights. They explained, while watching Jack teach a group of maintenance droids how to play catch using his detached prosthetic as the ball. "So Recruit Blob ventured one day, is it normal to feel both terrified and impressed? When dealing with humans, Krix-Ta's tentacles performed their now familiar seen-it-all wave. I believe that's the standard response. Though normal ceased to have any meaning about 5 minutes after Specialist Murphy arrived." As if to prove their point, Jack chose that moment to demonstrate his newest upgrade. He'd somehow modified his prosthetic to project holographic maintenance diagrams. "Check it out. Now I can show repair tutorials hands-free. Get it? Hands-free. Because technically it's not a hand." The maintenance staff's collective groan was drowned out by Jack's laughter. Lieutenant Krix-Ta noted with interest that several of the recruits had joined in either out of genuine amusement or some form of Stockholm Syndrome. At this point, it was getting hard to tell the difference. In conclusion, Lieutenant Krix-Ta addressed their class, tentacles moving in precise academic gestures. Our 3-month observation of human adaptation and resilience has yielded some unexpected insights. The holoprojector displayed a series of images. Jack using his prosthetic arm as an improvised jack stand, as a temporary reactor support, and somewhat inexplicably as what he called a back-scratcher supreme. When we began this study of Deathworlders, we focused on their physical capabilities, their ability to survive conditions that would reduce most species to their component atoms, their bizarre tolerance for temperature extremes and radiation. Krix-Ta's optical sensors pulsed thoughtfully. But we missed something far more fundamental. In the back of the classroom, Jack leaned against the wall, casually juggling maintenance tools with his organic and prosthetic hands. He'd gotten quite good at it, though the safety officer had instituted a new no-juggling fusion core components policy specifically because of him. "Humans aren't classified as Deathworlders merely because they can survive hostile conditions," Krix-Ta continued. "They're Deathworlders because they refuse to acknowledge that conditions are hostile in the first place. That's not true, Jack interjected. Sometimes we acknowledge it. We just don't care. Case in point, Krix-Ta's tentacles wiggled in what had become their Jack is being Jack gesture. Observe the specimens. Still can hear you. Observe Specialist Murphy's response to what should have been a career-ending injury. Instead of accepting medical retirement, he modified his prosthetic 47 times, invented 6 new maintenance techniques that violate several laws of physics, and somehow taught the facility's AI to play something called air guitar. The recruits, who had grown oddly fond of their resident human chaos factor, bobbed and vibrated in various signs of agreement. One of the gaseous ones had even learned to condense into a thumbs-up shape, though they couldn't hold it for long. So Recruit Chime asked, "Does this mean our original assessment of human threat levels was incorrect?" No, Krix-Ta replied. Just as Jack demonstrated his latest prosthetic modification apparently, he'd figured out how to use it as a universal remote for the facility's systems. If anything, we underestimated them. We thought their physical resilience was their most dangerous trait. We were wrong. The holoprojector showed a series of incident reports, each featuring Jack finding increasingly creative ways to use his prosthetic in maintenance emergencies. The latest one involved him using it as a temporary coolant pump, while simultaneously making robot dance jokes. Their most dangerous trait isn't their ability to survive. It's their ability to adapt, improvise, and most terrifyingly to treat potentially lethal situations as opportunities for innovation. You make it sound so serious, Jack grinned, detaching his prosthetic to scratch an itchy spot on his back. Sometimes you just need a really expensive back scratcher. Which brings me to my final point. Krix-Ta's tentacles moved in what their species considered a dramatic flourish. The true lesson of our observation period isn't about human physical capabilities. It's about their psychological resilience, their ability to face death with a joke, treat severe injury as an inconvenience, and view limitations as challenges to be overcome, preferably in the most ridiculous way possible. Speaking of ridiculous, Jack stepped forward, retaching his arm. Who wants to learn how to do a proper high five? I've calibrated the prosthetic for all known species' physical forms, even figured out how gaseous beings can participate. The recruits, to Krix-Ta's mixed horror and pride, actually volunteered. What followed was perhaps the galaxy's first cross-species high-five training session, complete with Jack's enthusiastic coaching. No, Recruit Blob, you've got to maintain surface tension. Recruit Chime, less chiming, more fiving. That's it, Recruit Gas Cloud, just condense right there. Perfect. Lieutenant Krix-Ta watched as their carefully trained military unit devolved into what appeared to be a celebration of successfully slapping a human's prosthetic hand. Their final log entry wrote itself. Conclusion: humans are classified as Deathworlders not because they can survive anything, but because they can survive anything while making it look like an entertaining inconvenience. This makes them either the galaxy's greatest potential allies or its most terrifying possible enemies. Possibly both. Hey, Lieutenant, Jack called out, his prosthetic now programmed with different high-five sound effects for each species. Come on, don't leave me hanging. I've got a special tentacle-friendly setting and everything. Krix-Ta looked at their notes, looked at their recruits all eagerly learning this bizarre human greeting ritual, and made what they would later claim was a tactical decision to maintain diplomatic relations. They high-fived Jack. It made a sound like a cartoon spring. The recruits cheered. And somewhere in the facility, a fusion core made a sound that definitely wasn't in the manual, but Jack assured everyone was totally fine, probably. Just another normal day with a human Deathworlder.